Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. How are we doing today? Today we're going to continue with the discussion of Adolf Hitler, continue of his story. This movie is called Hitler Part 2. We sort of talked about his early life, his youth, his relationship with his mother, how that may have influenced his life later on. We talked about his experience as a young man in World War I and how that had a very huge influence on him. And then we talked about the brief time period sort of after World War I where he is a relatively young adult and he's trying to figure out what he's going to do with himself. And where a lot of this comes from and how does his psyche work out and how does his mind work and those types of things. There are some things he was very talented and skilled at, like public speaking. But obviously this man had some deep-seated hatred within him, and so this is something that I think, as we talked about before, makes him a mystery and very curious to most people. Okay, so let's continue the story. I'll come back to this picture in just a moment. I sort of finished, I think, with number 18 in our paperwork. Okay, right? So remember, you should have these papers right here with the you're filling in the spaces in between, and I think we got to 18 or 19 already. And number 18 talked about, 16, 17, 18 sort of talked about how he wrote a book. And that book was really very informative, to be honest with you. It was really kind of called a joke at the time when it was published, but looking back on it now, you would have to argue, when you read the book, he wasn't kidding. He did exactly what he eventually does, exactly what he says in his book he was going to do. And so he decides he's going to become a politician. He's not going to be a revolutionary, even though you could probably argue he was. He is going to be a politician. And you need to remember at this time, okay, World War I is over. So they had a king. Germany had a king. Does this sound familiar, by the way? Germany had a king who got them into the war, World War I. Germany loses the war. The king is thrown out, and right now Germany is living has a democratic republic system. Okay, so he's a politician within that democratic republic system. Here's a picture of him giving a speech. He gave fiery speeches. He liked to do speeches indoors, especially in places that had good acoustics. He liked to, I'll tell you one thing he liked to do. He liked to show up late. He'd always come late. People are not in good shape and pretty miserable during this time period in Germany. They're mad, they're angry. And he would purposely show up late to play on that anger. You show up at 7 p.m. expecting a speech and it doesn't start till 8:15. Yeah, you're getting a little mad. And then so he understood that, and the crowd started off mad, and he played on that anger. So he's pretty smart, pretty brilliant public speaker by all accounts. Okay, by all accounts. All right, so let's continue sort of with this story. I sort of talked about number 19, and that's giving speeches. Look, people, this is sort of my point number 20 down here. People are unemployed in... isn't that interesting? Yeah, people were unemployed in Germany and they were getting irritated. They were getting angry. They were getting mad. They were getting frustrated with how things are going. Does this sound familiar? All right. And he basically starts moving towards eventually running for president, if you will. He is going to eventually run for president. And they're going to run a bunch of other candidates. The Nazi Party is going to run a bunch of other candidates to fill up the legislature, if you will. And the goal is to get to the 1932 presidential election. Okay, so now, hopefully you remember the other day when I told you about this thing, the beer hall putsch. You recall that? The beer hall putsch was this... It was a violent attempt to take control of the federal government of Germany in the city of Munich. Okay, so that kind of stuff's out the window. That's back in 1923, basically. So here we go, 9 years later, he's worked, worked very hard, frankly. By all accounts, he was a very hard-working politician, and he would travel and fly all over Germany, and he would give speeches, like 5 speeches a day, and he was super into it, and he had a lot of energy to get it done. Okay, and so here we get to number 21, if you will. You can see that he basically, there's a lot of guys who are running for president, but he basically finishes in second place. This is number 21 down here. And he is, in essence, the winner is a guy named Paul von Hindenburg. Okay, Hindenburg, that's the big blimp that blows up. We'll tell you that story later. Hindenburg becomes the president. The way they did it is the second place guy becomes what they call the chancellor. Okay, that's like the vice president. All right, so now you see number 22 here. You see how I have all these bullet points? I think there's 8 or 9 altogether. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 9 altogether. Okay, so here's 9 bullet points. Okay, so bullet point number 1. So basically, this is exactly what I'm trying to explain to you, is that in the 1932 election, Hindenburg wins, Hitler's second. So Hindenburg becomes President Hindenburg. The second bullet point I'm going to make is that Hindenburg basically names Hitler the Chancellor of Germany. So in essence, Hitler becomes the vice president of the country. He's in the second most powerful office in the country of Germany. All right? And so now he's got, dare I say, he's got legitimate power, doesn't he? He and the Nazi Party are, beyond any doubt up until this time, they are now legitimate. All right? Okay, so in the same election, okay, in the same election, there are races obviously for the legislature. Lots of Nazis win their elections, and a lot of communists win their election. Okay, so now this is where I'm going to go back to, and I'm going to say, yes, the Nazis and the communists are rivals, but they're both socialists. All right, and this is the way I put it to you. Keep in mind, what is Nazi short for? It's short for National Socialists. So these are people that want to run a socialist government, all right, but they're still interested in their nation in general. Communists are international socialists, all right? They're not as interested in the individual country. They would say workers of the world unite. Right now, if you're saying, I kind of forget what socialism is. Okay, well, if you can go back, and for those of you who were in the class in world history in second semester, you may recognize this, political spectrum number 2. But we did a whole bunch of political spectrum. If you were in my class last fall, okay, we might have to work on this. But we did this thing called a Freyer chart last year. Now, if you want me to send this to you, I'm going to post this as well. Okay, I'm going to post this for you all. And basically, this is the difference between these are economic systems, and both Hitler and Mussolini in Italy, and really all the communists, Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin, they're all socialists. They're all believers in an economic system based on the means of production being owned or severely regulated by the government control. That's what all these guys believe. But there is a difference in that there are national socialists and there are international socialists. So I'm going to repost this movie for you all so you can review if you would so like. Okay? But my point is, at this particular moment, these two sides are competing. It's just like the Protestants and the Catholics, okay, had an argument on how to run Christianity. The Sunnis and the Shias have an argument about how to run Islam. They're both Muslims, okay, Sunni Muslim, Shia Muslim, but they have different opinions on how to run Islam, how Islam should be carried out. Nazis, they're socialists, communists, they're socialists, but they have a different attitude and belief on how it should be run. Okay? So, but my point is, at this moment, they're competitive. Okay. What happens is a seminal event, very important event occurs, and it's this building. This building is called the Reichstag. And if you go back to political spectrum number 2, you can see that I discussed this right here. Okay? This seminal moment, by the way, you recognize Reign of Terror right there? So the Reichstag fire. Remember, Germany had a king. When Germany loses World War I, the king is replaced and they have a republic. It was called the Weimar Republic. Then this event happens in the Reichstag fire, and my point, I'm telling you the story of this whipsaw back to absolutism over here. Okay? Somebody sets the Reichstag building, which is the legislative building. It would be like somebody setting the United States Capitol building on fire. And basically, they catch a communist guy at the scene. And so this communist guy, he's not a legislator, he's just a young guy who's a communist. They catch him there, and he gets blamed for it. Okay, this guy is now blamed, and because he's a communist, the communists are blamed. The German communists are blamed for setting the building on fire. So Hindenburg basically says he is presented with a series of writings and laws, if you will, that are going to suspend civil liberties in Germany. What does this mean? Well, right of free speech, right of things you would think of in the United States, right to assemble, right of expression, okay? Things like that are suspended in Germany, and this is Hitler's idea, all right? And so Hindenburg said, because what do we got to do? We got to solve these problems. We've got to stop all this anarchy that these communists are causing. And Hitler signs the law. And now the Nazi government rounds up bunches of communists. Because what's their argument? Well, the communists set fire to the Reichstag. So now the argument is, the government says, let's round up a bunch of communists and prosecute them. Well, isn't that convenient? That's the Nazis, right? The Nazis, now suddenly the Nazis' main competition, they're getting rounded up and thrown in jail. So what has happened to the Nazis' competition? They're virtually eliminated. And then what happens is later in 1933, Hindenburg dies. And Hindenburg was an older gentleman. So now what happens when the president dies? The vice president becomes the leader. And that person, of course, was Hitler. And Hitler now is named president. He rises, by law, he rises to the level of president, if you will, of Germany. But within a very short amount of time, he declares himself dictator. In other words, he says, there's no more elections. We are not a republic anymore. We are going to be, and he calls it the nation, the empire that he's going to try to create of Germany. All right, there's no more republic. All right, so he eliminates that. And one of the things he does that he's got to do, and one of the things I would sort of say to you as you see this over and over again, is that he has got to have a force, and so we're going to get into this when we sort of talk live, this concept of a paramilitary. And the Nazis have always had a paramilitary. Now the word paramilitary is basically the word parallel and military together. And so the Nazis had a bunch of guys that they got together that basically would do the dirty work and the muscle work, and literally, they all had guns. These guys came out of the beer hall pooch, and the paramilitary was a group called the SA. And this group is going to, and I'm going to talk about this in more detail later on, this group is going to morph into something called the SS. All right, the SA is disbanded. Maybe you've heard of Hitler Youth Clubs or Hitler Youth Organizations. All right, these were extremely, extremely popular in Germany at this time. And so how do you fill up the ranks of these paramilitaries? You fill them up with kids who have gone through Hitler Youth Organizations and Hitler Youth Clubs. As they become older, they fill up these paramilitary Nazi groups. And eventually, of course, when Hitler becomes president, they fill up the actual German military. They fill up the German army and the German Air Force and the German Navy. Okay? During the time of the Republic, the Germans were not allowed to have a big military because of World War I. They lost World War I. They were dictated. They had to have a small military. Hitler says, we're out of that. We're not doing that. We are going to rebuild. Number 24, I want to show you this person, probably one of the most, dare I say, intelligent people of Hitler's most inner circle. His name is Joseph Goebbels, or Goebbels. I know there's not an R in there, but that's how you pronounce it. This is Joseph Goebbels right here, one of his famous pictures. He was also very good at giving speeches. He was the minister of propaganda. Now, I know a lot of you are interested in media in this school. Of course, media is a major part of the things that are going on at this school. Digital video production. One of the first people to really understand digital and video and film in the world was Joseph Goebbels. So when I say minister of propaganda, we would sort of think of the Secretary of the Interior, the Secretary of Agriculture, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Attorney General. We call those cabinet positions, don't we? Well, this was one of the most important aspects of Nazi Germany, was this idea this was going to be a cabinet position in the administration, if you will, of Adolf Hitler. So what I want you to see is this picture right here. All right, Joseph Goebbels was a master at this kind of thing. These big, huge displays of Nazi power, dare I say, quote-unquote superiority. And what I would sort of say to you is one of the things I think is very interesting if you look at this is that, so Hitler is standing right, that's where Hitler is standing. And you can see that Hitler is sort of separated from everybody else here. But if you look at the group, okay, is there any individuality out here? Is there any uniqueness out here? No, it is exactly the same. And you can't tell the difference between anybody in here. There's only one person who is really important here, and that's this person at the center. And so this is the kind of thing that propaganda, this concept of propaganda, and really, if you want to know what propaganda is a TV commercial. You're watching a show and a commercial comes on for 30 seconds. That is an advertisement, how's that sound, for that particular product. Well, this, everybody, is an advertisement for Adolf Hitler, isn't it? Okay, here's sort of another picture, if you will. He was master at organizing these big, huge rallies and parades to celebrate the Nazi Party, the nation of Germany, and ultimately the race that I hope you heard me mention the other day, the Aryan race, the race of the white-skinned, blue-eyed, blonde-haired individual that they believed they came from. Okay, so let's see if I can find this one other shot here to sort of give you, this is another good example. Okay, this is another good example. Again, what do you notice about the crowd? You notice okay, so here you got the crowd down below, and they're kind of all in a conglomeration, in a big blur. They're all sort of faceless. It's a mass. But what rises above the mass? What is naturally above the mass? What's the highest person? You can see how this is the kind of thing that Joseph Goebbels was an absolute master at doing. Okay, let me see if I can find one other thing here. Did I go too far yet? Oh, here it is. I think I wanted to show you this concept of how these dictatorships always try to get control of education. Okay, so here's a famous poster from the time period for Hitler Youth organizations. Okay, so here's the individual youth, and again, it's sort of a stereotype. This kid has got blonde hair, white skin, blue-eyed. All right, so that's side of a stereotype, even though he's singular here. But what's behind it? So this is an ad, if you will, for a Hitler Youth organization. Check this out. They weren't just for boys at all. They weren't just for boys at all. There were Hitler Youth clubs for girls as well. And I can tell you some more paroling stuff. That's not necessarily, that was kind of, anyway, there's a lot more to be told about those, and I will do that at a later time. Okay, so one of the things I think you'll find interesting is the Olympics. One of the people you should look up is a guy named Jesse Owens. Jesse Owens was an African American. He went to Ohio State University, and he came to the Olympics were basically held in Berlin in the summer of 1936, the Summer Olympics. Okay, And Goebbels was the one who said, oh my God, this is a great opportunity to demonstrate how superior our race is. And basically, I can tell you that the German athletes, Germany won the most medals. They won the most gold medals, they won the most medals. And, you know, the place was, as you can imagine, all this stuff was all over the place, and it was very impressive. And anyway, so Jesse Owens shows up, and Jesse Owens does something unprecedented in the history of modern Olympics. He won 4 gold medals, all in sprinting. Okay, excuse me. One was a field event. He won the long jump. Okay, so he won the 100, the 200. He was in the 4x100, just like Usain Bolt. Those are Usain Bolt's same events. Okay, the 100, 200, and 4x1. But Jesse Owens was also a long jumper. I bet Usain Bolt could have been a good long jumper as well. All right, and so this was a way for the Nazis to display to the world how awesome they were. Okay, all right. Now, one of the people that we need to make a sort of a big deal about here is this man right here. That's with Hitler. His name is Benito Mussolini. Benito Mussolini of Italy. Okay, so there's going to be something you're going to look up about him. That's his name. All right, and it's this man. And actually, he became leader of Italy before Hitler became leader of Germany. And in fact, Hitler really admired Mussolini and the way Mussolini had achieved power in Italy. And again, here's another National Socialist. Okay, we're going to talk about a paramilitary. I just talked about a paramilitary in Germany. Mussolini had a paramilitary in Italy as well. These guys sort of, really in many ways, Hitler followed Mussolini's playbook. Now as time went along, Mussolini became the sort of second fiddle, if you will, to Hitler. Hitler became the dominant force in the unification, all right? But these two guys basically write a treaty together. And this treaty says, hey, whatever we do, whatever one of us does, we're going to follow the other one. We're going to support the other one. And they're both building up their armies and their militaries for a particular plan, as you might imagine. Okay? And then I asked you to look into number 27, Kristallnacht. Okay? That's a German term that means the night of shattered glass. And this was certainly the Nazis had a lot of discussion and a lot of stuff going on about their hatred of Jews. I sort of talked about the 3 strikes against the Jews. Remember that? Hitler's mother and the Jewish doctor, Hitler not getting into art school and the Jewish headmaster, the theory of World War III, the theory of World War I that Jews did not fight, German Jews did not fight, they made money off of the war effort, all of which are easily sort of debunked, if you will. The Night of Shattered Glass was a night in which all over Germany, a plant, and by the way, it was the Nazis claimed it was a reaction to the murder of a Nazi by a Jew. A Jew supposedly murdered a Nazi guy, and so this was retaliation for that. The Nazis against all Jews. And so they call it the Night of Shattered Glass because Nazis would walk the streets and they would throw bricks through the windows of people's shops, okay? And they would parade. They would literally force Jewish people to parade out in front of them. They would embarrass these people and threaten them, and all kinds of just sort of horrific things. All right, and so let's just sort of finish today with number 28, and then I'll tell you one other last story. Number 28, the treaty this is one of the big deals here, is that the treaty that ends World War I, and again, this is called the Treaty of Versailles. It actually was negotiated at Versailles Palace. That's why it's called what it's called. The Germans thought this was extremely unfair, and one of the things that it said, of many things, it said, Germany cannot have a big military. Well, Hitler immediately starts building the military. He immediately breaks the Treaty of Versailles. And the Treaty of Versailles had given a portion of Germany to France. This place was called the Rhineland. Okay? And the Rhineland was basically, if you will, dare I say, held by the French. And so Hitler says, no, we're taking it back. And in 1936, the German army marches into the Rhineland and reoccupies it. And the French did absolutely nothing to stop them. The French did not try to even do a thing to prevent this from happening. Okay? All right. So that's the end of my story so far today, but I'm going to tell you an even shorter story here briefly that I think you'll find very fascinating and I think you'll really enjoy. Okay? And then we'll tell the rest of the story, of course, when we do part 3. And what I would like you to do is I would like you to, on the textbook assignment, make sure you have number 5 done by Friday at least, so we can talk about that. Okay? So now, I want to go back to this, the Olympics. And Jesse Owens. Remember now, this is an African-American guy. Okay? He's a black man from I believe he's from Ohio. He went to Ohio State, and he won 4 gold medals, and he's black, and he wins these medals at Olympics that sort of, the whole point of it was to show the superior of the white race, if you will. Okay, so I want to tell you the story of 2 guys. Oh, you're gonna love this story. This is so good. Okay, so these 2 guys are brothers. They're German guys. Okay, and these 2 German guys are the Dassler brothers. Alrighty, and the Dassler brothers' family business was making shoes, and this is right at this time. Okay, on the rise of Hitler, and the Dassler brothers become members of the German Nazi Party. All right. So these guys are serious Nazis, but they're also serious about making, look, they become Nazis, okay? So, but these guys are also serious businessmen. And so they say, how do we sell more shoes? Well, we need somebody famous to wear our shoes, okay? Dassler shoes. And they figure out their first great customer that they're going to approach to wear their shoes. In other words, this is sort of like Nike, if you will. This is like Nike getting LeBron James or Michael Jordan or Tiger Woods, okay? Nike has those guys, right? Well, guess who the Dassler brothers, you would not think this, guess who the Dassler brothers approach to become their featured athlete wearing their shoes? Well, you're right. It's Jesse Owens. Now, this seems very odd, doesn't it? Here you got a couple of Nazi guys, brothers, okay? And who do they approach? An African American, all right, a black skinned man, to be their spokesman, their #1 star athlete. And Owens agrees. And they meet him for the first time. When Owens arrives in Germany for the Olympics, Owens wears their shoes. He actually really likes their shoes. And the Dassler brothers pull off this big thing. Okay, now the brothers, sometimes family members don't get along, and the brothers, for as long as they had been alive, did not like each other. They actually despised each other, and they had been that way for their whole lives. Their factory was actually, their shoe factory was converted to make boots for the German army during World War II. As World War II came to an end, their factory was bombed by Allied bombers, as many factories in Germany were bombed out. Okay, and the war ends, and finally, Adolf and Rudolf Dassler have had enough of each other. So the World War II ends in 1945. These guys stopped speaking, eventually cut it off. They have nothing to do with each other after 1948. Okay, now, here's where you will find all this interesting. Adolf Dassler was kind of nicknamed Addy. All right? And so Addy, of course, is going to continue. Look, this is what they do. They make shoes. So Addy is going to make his own shoe company. Do you know what Addy called his new shoe company? Well, I'll give you a hint. What was his name? His name was Addy Dassler. So guess what his shoe combo of Addy and Dassler, what's his new company called? Adidas. Okay? So if you've ever wondered where the term Adidas comes from, It comes from this man, Adi Dassler. So if you have stuff that's Adidas stuff, that company was started by a Nazi. And by the way, Rudolph, who was known as Rudy or Ruda, really he was known, his nickname was Ruda Dassler. Ruda started his own company too. Guess what his company is? His company became Puma. All right, so there you have two of the most famous shoe companies in all of the world. Lots of athletes wear their shoes. Lots of individuals wear their clothing. But here you go, two Nazi guys started those two companies. Isn't that just the most fascinating thing ever? And a great story. Okay, everybody. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time. Aloha.